History, as it's taught in schools, is a lie. It's a clean, curated collection of dates and names, presented as a neat and tidy timeline of progress. It's a storybook where the heroes are noble and the villains are obvious. But that's not history. That's propaganda. The real history of humanity is a messy, chaotic, and often deeply disturbing story, and its most compelling chapters are the ones that have been systematically ripped out of the book. The powerful have always worked to sanitize their legacies, leaving us with marble statues and flattering portraits that conceal the truth of their nature. Tonight we're going to put the missing pages back in the book. We're stepping behind the gilded frames and into the shadows where the real stories are told. This isn't just a list of forgotten names. This is an exploration into the very nature of power, desire, and the darkness that can fester in the human heart when there are no consequences. These are the people who proved that the past was stranger, more brutal, and infinitely more fascinating than you have ever been led to believe. We begin our journey in the blood-soaked fields of 15th century France with a name that should have been synonymous with divine glory. Gilded. To understand the sheer scale of his fall, you must first understand the height of his heroism. Picture France on its knees, crippled by the 100 Years' War. Hope is a dying ember. And then, a miracle appears. Joan of Arc, fighting right beside her, a symbol of French chivalry, is Baron Gilded. He is fabulously wealthy, pious, and astonishingly brave. He is instrumental in the legendary siege of Orléans, and for his valor, he is granted the highest possible military honor, Marshal of France. He stands next to Joan as the king is crowned. He is, for all intents and purposes, a living saint, a warrior blessed by God. But what happens when the holy war is over? What does a man who has tasted the peak of glory do when the world no longer needs a savior? Reyes retired to his vast estates, a man with limitless wealth and no purpose. He began a descent into unparalleled extravagance, funding theatrical plays that cost more than a royal wedding, and delving into the dark arts of alchemy, hoping to turn lead into gold to finance his insatiable spending. He was searching for a new thrill, a new frontier of experience. It was then that the whispers began. At first, they were just frightened folktales in remote villages, stories of a monster snatching children from the countryside. For years, the disappearances were dismissed. Who would dare point a finger at the great war hero? But the number of missing children grew, and the whispers turned into desperate pleas. A political dispute with the Duke of Brittany finally gave his enemies an excuse to investigate. What they uncovered was a secret history of evil that defied comprehension. His trial became the sensation of the century, revealing that for years, Reyes had been luring children to his castles. The court records detail his confession, a chilling, systematic account of his crimes, of rituals and sadism, that painted a portrait of a man who had traded his soul for the ultimate sensation. The hero of France was unmasked as a demon in disguise, leaving an entire nation to grapple with a terrifying question: how much evil can hide behind a hero's face? From a fallen hero, we journey back to the dizzying madness of ancient Rome, and an emperor who made the infamous Caligula look like a stable and effective ruler, Elagabalus. He was only 14 when he was brought to Rome, not as a general or a statesman, but as the hereditary high priest of a Syrian sun god, Elagabala. He arrived not with a plan for governance, but with a holy black meteorite. He declared the new supreme deity of the entire Roman Empire. Imagine being a powerful, stoic Roman senator, forced to perform ritual dances and offer sacrifices to a rock. This was just the first sign that the empire had entered an age of surreal chaos. Elagabalus had zero interest in ruling. He saw the most powerful position in the world as his personal playground for performance art. His banquets became the stuff of legend. He would serve his guests meals made entirely of one color or present them with life-sized food replicas of their own faces. He famously constructed a surprise ceiling that would drop tons of flower petals on his diners. It sounded delightful until the sheer volume suffocated the guests sitting underneath. He took pleasure in appointing his lovers and cronies to the highest offices of state based not on their skills, but on absurd physical attributes. He caused a profound religious and social crisis by marrying a Vestal virgin, a priestess sworn to celibacy under penalty of death. It was an act of supreme blasphemy, but what truly scandalized the hypermasculine Roman elite was his open and fluid approach to gender. Ancient sources claim he offered a fortune to any surgeon who could physically transform him into a woman. His reign was a 4-year-long fever dream of sacrilege and absurdity, and it ended as you'd expect. His own Praetorian Guard, the very soldiers meant to protect him, could no longer stomach the madness they offed him, and his mother dragged their bodies through the streets and dumped them in the Tiber River like common trash. But depravity wasn't just a feature of ancient tyrants. Let's move to the supposedly enlightened 18th century, to a man who embodied the British establishment, Sir Francis Dashwood. Here was a man at the centre of power, a member of Parliament, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, the man in charge of the entire British economy, and a respected intellectual who collaborated with Benjamin Franklin on a new version of the Book of Common Prayer. He was, to all outside observers, a pillar of reason and civility. But the public image was a carefully crafted lie. Dashwood's true passion was for what lay on the other side of reason. He was the founder and guiding spirit of the most infamous secret society of the era, the Hellfire Club. Under the rebellious motto, "Do what thou wilt," Dashwood and a cabal of Britain's most powerful men, politicians, artists, and even nobility would gather to indulge their darkest impulses. He had a series of caves elaborately excavated beneath his country estate, complete with a man-made river called the Styx. There, dressed in the robes of Franciscan monks, they would conduct bizarre parodies of Catholic rituals, hold decadent feasts, and engage in rumored orgies with women disguised as nuns. It was a deliberate two fingers to the establishment they ran during the day. While the full extent of their activities died with the members, the Hellfire Club represented the ultimate hypocrisy. The very men preaching morality and order to the public were privately engaging in blasphemy, paganism, and unrestrained debauchery. Just a century before Dashwood's organized chaos, another English nobleman embraced a more personal and poetic form of anarchy. John Wilmot, the second Earl of Rochester, was a man blessed with every advantage: handsome, witty, aristocratic, and a genuinely brilliant poet. He was the superstar of King Charles II's notoriously decadent Restoration court, but his genius was inseparable from his self-destructive hedonism. Rochester's entire life was a relentless sprint toward oblivion, fueled by alcohol and a compulsive need to shatter every social and moral taboo. He wrote poetry of such breathtaking vulgarity and satirical genius that it couldn't be legally published in its uncensored form until the 1960s. He was a performance artist of debauchery. He was famously exiled from court for writing a libelous poem about the king's obsession with his mistresses, only to be forgiven and welcomed back. He once disguised himself as a quack, Dr. Bendo, and set up a stall in London where he treated women for infertility, with predictable results. His life was a blur of duels, scandals, and legendary drinking binges. He once claimed to have been drunk for 5 years together. But beneath the swagger was a deeply philosophical mind, grappling with the meaninglessness of a world he saw as corrupt and absurd. He burned out at just 33, a spectacular flame consumed by his own fire, leaving behind a body of work that would later inspire rebels and punk rockers centuries later. And this assertion of absolute personal freedom wasn't just a game for European men. In 17th century Africa, Queen Zinga of Mbunde was playing for the highest stakes imaginable, the survival of her people. She was a brilliant, ruthless, and politically savvy ruler who fought a 40-year war against the Portuguese Empire's attempts to enslave her people. She was a master of diplomacy and guerrilla warfare, a figure of immense power and respect, and she expressed that power within her own court in a way that utterly defied convention. She established a large harem, a common practice for powerful male rulers of the time. But Nzinga's harem was comprised entirely of men, and these men, often young and strong, were legally required to dress, live, and serve her as women. They were her wives. This was far more than a personal eccentricity. It was a calculated act of political theatre. In a world dominated by patriarchal systems, both African and European, Nzinga's gender-flipped court was a constant, visual declaration of her absolute authority. It sent a clear message to rivals and allies alike. She was not a female ruler. She was simply the ruler, and she would define the rules of gender, power, and society as she saw fit. Then there was the curious and confounding case of the Abbé de Choisy. In the rigid, God-fearing France of King Louis XIV, Choisy was a man of the establishment. He was a respected diplomat, sent on important missions, an author of historical texts, and a member of the prestigious French Academy. He was also an abbé, a man of the church. But from a very young age, encouraged by his mother, Choisy had a profound love for dressing and living as a woman, and this was no secret affair. For much of his adult life, he was a fixture of Parisian high society known as the Comtesse de Sancy, attending balls, theatres, and salons, in exquisite gowns, jewelry, and makeup. He wrote in his memoirs about the thrill of being courted by men who had no idea of his biological sex. This wasn't a hidden life, it was an open performance. In an era where deviation from one's prescribed role in life could mean ruin or even death, Choisy navigated the highest circles of power while openly defying its most fundamental rule. He was a paradox, a man of God who lived as a noble woman, a servant of the king who served his own unique identity first. Scandal was also brewing at the very heart of the French Revolution, embodied by one of its most complex figures, the Comte de Mirabeau. To the masses, Mirabeau was a titan. Though born a nobleman, he was a fiery champion of the common people. His thunderous speeches in the National Assembly captivated the nation and helped dismantle the old monarchy. He was seen as the voice of the revolution, a bridge between the aristocracy and the people. But his public life of political virtue was built on a foundation of private vice. Before his revolutionary fame, Mirabeau was notorious for his scandalous affairs, his gambling, and the colossal debts he accrued. He was imprisoned multiple times by his own father to protect the family from his disgrace. It was from the grim confines of a prison cell that Mirabeau launched a secret and far more profitable career. He became one of the most prolific and popular authors of erotic literature of his time. His novels, like The Garden of Priapus, were explicit, subversive, and hugely successful. So the same man who was drafting declarations on the rights of man was also secretly penning detailed fantasies that would become forbidden bestsellers across Europe. He was a living contradiction, a public patriot, and a private pornographer. You might think the church would offer a sanctuary from such earthly desires, but often it was the epicenter. Enter Pope Leo X, born Giovanni de' Medici, from the wealthiest and most powerful banking family in Florence. He was made a cardinal at 13 and became pope without ever having been a priest. He viewed the papacy not as a sacred spiritual calling, but as the ultimate family business achievement. His rule was a non-stop spectacle of indulgence. He was a patron of the arts, funding geniuses like Raphael, but his spending was catastrophic. His banquets were so lavish they nearly bankrupted the Vatican, featuring thousands of guests and courses that included exotic animals. But it was his personal life that drew the most whispers. Rumors of scandalous parties and his close affections for a number of handsome young men were rife in Rome. He was famously and perhaps apocryphally quoted as saying, "Since God has given us the papacy, let us enjoy it." To fund this enjoyment and the grand rebuilding of St. Peter's Basilica, he aggressively expanded the sale of indulgences, a get-out-of-purgatory-free card for sinners with enough cash. It was this blatant corruption, this monetization of salvation, that provoked a humble German monk named Martin Luther to nail his 95 Theses to a church door, lighting the fuse of the Protestant Reformation and shattering Western Christendom forever. Even as the world entered the supposed sophistication of the 20th century, the temptations of absolute power remained. King Farouk, the last king of Egypt, was a man-child who inherited a throne and a vast fortune. In his youth, he was celebrated, but power quickly rotted him from the inside out. He developed an insatiable appetite for everything: food, wealth, and pleasure. His weight ballooned, and he became a notorious kleptomaniac, with an unnerving habit of stealing things from people he met, including Winston Churchill's pocket watch. But his most consuming obsession was collecting. He didn't just collect stamps or coins. He used his state power to build one of the world's largest private collections of explicit materials. It was a library of forbidden knowledge, an obsession that consumed his time and the nation's resources. While his people faced poverty and political turmoil, Their king was living in a fantasy world, dispatching agents to acquire rare items for his secret galleries. His detachment from reality and his scandalous lifestyle made him a symbol of corruption, directly fueling the revolutionary fire that would see him overthrown and exiled, leaving him with nothing but his tarnished memories. But our final destination on this journey into the shadows is the court of a woman who was more formidable than any king. Caterina Sforza, the indomitable tiger of Forlì. In the cutthroat world of Renaissance Italy, she was a true anomaly. After the assassination of her first husband, she didn't retreat into mourning. She rode with a small army to the gates of Forlì and seized power for herself and her son. She was a brilliant and utterly ruthless military leader. The most famous story of her defiance is legendary, when conspirators captured her children and threatened to kill them unless she surrendered her fortress. She supposedly climbed the castle walls, lifted her skirts to expose herself, and shouted that she had the means to make more children. Whether true or not, the story captures her spirit, but her ferocity wasn't limited to the battlefield. Caterina was a devoted alchemist and scientist, spending hours in her laboratory. She compiled a famous book of experiments, a vast collection of recipes for everything from cosmetics and hair dyes to cures for the plague. But intertwined with these remedies were recipes for deadly and untraceable poisons. It's rumored she tested these concoctions on condemned prisoners, observing their effects with cold, scientific detachment. She was a product of her time, a blend of Renaissance curiosity, political cunning, and medieval cruelty, a woman who used beauty, knowledge, and fear as interchangeable weapons. So there you have it. Heroes who were secretly monsters, rulers who lived in a dream world of their own making, popes who sparked revolutions through their own greed. These aren't footnotes of history, they are the story of history. They show us that power doesn't just corrupt, it untethers people from reality, from morality, from humanity itself. The sanitized version of the past we are fed is designed to make us comfortable, to make us believe that the world is orderly. But the truth is that it has always been a chaotic, brutal, and deeply strange place, shaped by the very human desires that still drive us today. It makes you wonder, if this is the truth that's been buried about the past, what secrets are being hidden right now, waiting for a future generation to uncover?